Good evening and welcome to Business PNG. Despite much skepticism, the Papua New Guinea economy continues to do well, maintaining strong economic growth that is consistent with the rest of Asia, particularly Southeast Asia. This was the key message from ANZ Chief Economist Warren Hogan. Apart from this, the Economist also believes that developing infrastructure, as well as a skilled workforce, is key to maintaining economic development in the country. Eunice chats with Warren Hogan as he gives an update of the country's economy.
Welcome viewers, we're joined by the Chief Economist for ANZ, Mr. Warren Hogan. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So you're here for a special visit. What is the current state of PNG's economy for 2013?
It's looking very good actually, particularly in comparison to a lot of economies around the world, but is consistent with what we're seeing in many Asian economies, particularly Southeast Asian economies, and that is growth that is still, I would regard as strong. We're expecting it around 6%, although down a little bit from last year. That's about the same level of growth we're seeing in many Asian countries, and is obviously well above what we're seeing in advanced economies. Even Australia, which is doing very, very well at the moment, it will only grow at around 2 to 3% at best this year. So we're looking for around 6, which is, I think, a sustainable rate of growth through to next year as well. It might be a touch slower. Then, of course, economic growth is going to pick up a lot with the export boom coming.
Okay, so Australia currently is our major trading partner. Should PNG look beyond that? Should we look at Asia or other countries about? Most
certainly. Australia is dominating trade with PNG. It's around 40 to 45% of PNG's international trade, and that's good because Australia is a stable economy and PNG benefits from that. But the opportunity, the future for this economy is in Asia. That's the same for Australia. It's the same for many countries in the region. This is the part of the world, in Southeast Asia in particular, that is generating the highest rates of economic growth. North Asia is being dominated by strong growth in China. That will flow through to Southeast Asia as well. So I see the first wave of this opportunity coming through mineral resources and energy, and obviously the LNG project's underway, and that's going to be an important part of it. But this will continue for many years, if not decades to come. The demand for resources across the whole of Asia is going to be strong for a long time to come because these economies are urbanising, they're developing, they're becoming rich. So PNG inevitably, if it takes advantage of this boom in demand for resources and then agriculture, will be trading with Asia. And so I would say that Australia's trade with Papua New Guinea will continue to increase, but nothing like the increase we'll see with the rest of Asia. So Australia will slowly fall as a proportion of PNG's trade.
Okay. So right now our government is focusing more on building infrastructure. They're putting a lot of money into it from our budget. From your perspective as an economist, what should we worry about in terms of trying to develop this infrastructure?
The main thing is delivering and actually putting it in place and putting good quality infrastructure that is what Papua New Guinea needs for its development. And this government, I believe, is quite clear on what it wants, and it sees the opportunity that we see at ANZ, that we see in this region, and that is primarily, as I said before, in the mineral resource and energy space, then the agriculture. And of course, if those industries can lead the way, eventually the benefits will flow through to the domestic economy, and you'll see the services grow and businesses grow here and new businesses form. This is the great opportunity that PNG has right now, and infrastructure is the most important thing to put in place. Right now there needs to be an improvement in economic infrastructure to attract the capital to take advantage of the resources. But it's a broad infrastructure investment. Education is critical. Must upskill the local people to be able to get the jobs and deliver these projects. Law and order is critical. Health, all of these. So infrastructure spending is going to be a huge part of what the government's got to do for many, many years to come. And if anything, I would think the government's being conservative. It's a big lift in what they're doing. It's a huge lift. But this investment is critical for PNG, and I think the government must focus on delivery, and if it gets some runs on the board, it starts to put some of this infrastructure in place effectively, then it should try and up the pace over the years ahead.
Another thing you had stated was that the government should start looking at bonds, issuing bonds. Why should we actually start looking at that?
Well, effectively, the capital needed to build out the infrastructure and invest in mineral resources and energy and agriculture has to be front-loaded. So the revenues that come from this investment will take many, many years to come through, but the infrastructure and the broader investment has to take place. The government will lead the way, particularly around infrastructure, and the government will therefore have to run deficits. And there is nothing wrong with a government in any country running a deficit if that deficit is being driven by investment in infrastructure, because that investment, again, assuming it is the right infrastructure, has payoffs in the future. And any debt that is incurred, any loans that the government has to make, which is what a bond effectively is, or undertake, will be paid off by the taxes it makes in the future. And this is, I think, an important part of the PNG economic development story over the next few years, is to develop a bond market that the government can access to raise the money to put the infrastructure in place. And there's many examples of countries, emerging countries that have done this, and I think PNG is well placed to do that.
Earlier you had talked about how we have to improve education. Now our problem is in Papua New Guinea, we don't have the skilled workforce. What's happened over the years since the LNG project is that we've had skilled workers from overseas come here and work here. However, another problem that is faced is that you've got skilled personnel in Papua New Guinea who are already experienced. They can't work here, they go overseas because multinationals request that they do that, or they prefer it that way because the working conditions are better. How should we best deal with this?
Well, it's a very tricky point, and hopefully there's some loyalty to the country and people want to live here and be part of this historic opportunity and this historic change, which I would hope to, and I think many Papua New Guineans would hope to see come about. You can't force people, as best as I can tell, but this gets back to the social infrastructure. If people are investing in themselves and getting degrees in engineering and various other professional skills, and they're able to attract incomes in a global marketplace, which we really live in now, one of the things that would obviously work against them is if there's not good healthcare, if there's not good education for their children. So to keep locals here, let alone to attract people from offshore to come and work here, you need that social infrastructure. You need good schools for the children. You need a health system for the children as well as for everyone else. And that will make people want to live here. This is a beautiful part of the world to live in terms of the climate and all the things that go along with it. But of course that infrastructure is not there. And I think that's, again, reinforces this infrastructure story.
Our chat with Mr. Hogan continues after the break. Stay with us. The government has already made some bold moves in order to further strengthen the PNG economy, one being the concessional loans secured from China. With that being said, is this bold move a good move? This is a question a lot of us may ask. But first, let's hear what Mr. Hogan has to say about this.
Another thing that we have to talk about is concessional loans. Now the current government's taken out a lot of loans. From an economic point of view, will that pay off? Is it a very good step that we've taken?
Look, any loan, whether it's concessional or not, will be justified on the way the money's used.
Right.
So if these concessional loans are used to put in place infrastructure that is of economic value, then it's of no problem. There's other issues around any conditionality with those loans, and those things are a separate issue. But if the government undertakes borrowing to invest in useful infrastructure, that is not a problem at all.
The focus for the PNG government, the current government, is to upgrade infrastructure and also decentralization. Is that the best approach from an economist's perspective?
Look, I think there's it's not clear that there's any one way to go about it, and a huge part of this challenge for the government is getting the broader community on board. So if that's their assessment on the way to maintain a political mandate to undertake this investment, this reform, then I think they're in the best place to judge that. In terms of executing on infrastructure spending and executing on economic reform, it does need to be driven from a core leadership, from the Prime Minister, from the central government. But there are these challenges which mean for practical purposes that there may have to be some concession there. But in the end, the most important thing is to make the community aware of the opportunity that is out there for Papua New Guinea right here, right now, and that some very bold investments need to take place that do bring some risk with it. That is, if they fail, it could be an issue. It also requires change. Effectively, PNG is looking at heavily participating in the global economy and all the benefits that come with that in terms of higher incomes and wealth and the infrastructure, but that will involve change in the way people have to go about things. And so the political element, the bringing the community with you is critical for the government, and they've got to make a judgment on how they do that.
There are a lot of impediments that hinder business or investment growth in Papua New Guinea. Recently, they had done a survey, and we were actually right at the bottom of the list. One of the things that are being revised is our tax regime. Another thing is obviously the infrastructure investment from the PNG government. Mm-hmm. Do you believe this may help solve the problem or diminish or minimize this?
Yeah, well, it's not about solving the problem, it's about moving in the right direction. So, to be fair, PNG's, I think, ranked 104 out of 180 odd nations that were looked at in this ease of doing business survey, which I think you're referring to. And to be fair, given where PNG's development is at, that's not too bad. There are certain positives there, and they need to be recognised and reinforced. The impediments, I think, again, we get back to this question of infrastructure. That is key. I mean, if companies have to come and set up and then provide their own infrastructure, whether it be electricity or roads and stuff, that puts a huge cost on business and it makes the investment decision very hard. So I think we've covered that. But more generally speaking, a focus from the government in partnering with business, which is, from what I understand it, very much this Prime Minister's objective is to work with the private sector. That will go a long way. So I'm quite optimistic that PNG is moving in the right direction. It'll take time, and PNG doesn't need to be ranked number 1 or 10 or 20 even. It just needs to move in the right direction, and because the opportunity is great. The opportunity to earn incomes and earn money on capital for global investors in Papua New Guinea is much higher than just about anywhere in the world. You can't earn money in Europe. In Japan, there's no natural economic growth. Here, there is potential. So the more the government can look like it's helping to bring capital here, helping to work with business, then I believe that will come through. So I think that's happening.
All right, so thank you for answering all our questions about the PNG economy. Now let's talk about your company, ANZ. How's growth been around the region recently?
Very good. We're lucky, just like the PNG economy or the Australian economy, the ANZ Bank is operating in the fast-growing part of the world. Indonesia's economy, which is important, I think, or should be important to both Australia and PNG, is an important operation for ANZ. It's been growing at around 6-7%. This is the 4th largest populated country in the world, growing at those sorts of rates. And we're operating across the whole of Asia in just about every country. And there are some challenges, particularly in certain economies which are more open to the world economy, like Singapore or Hong Kong. Those economies go up and down with the world economy. But ANZ is committed to this broader Asian economy and are benefiting from this great level of economic growth. And of course, the numbers are showing it is that we are now generating about just under 20% of our business outside of Australia and New Zealand or in Asia, and that's on line for the Chief Executive's target of around 25 to 30% in a few years' time. So everything is on track, and I think it's quite clear from the way the world economy is performing that a great proportion of the world's wealth creation is occurring in this region and will for many years to come. In fact, our assessment from the economic research side is that in the next 10 years, about 2/3 to 3/4 of the wealth created in the world will come out of Asia. And that is a phenomenal amount. And it's a real reverse to the last 30 or 40 years where it's all been in Europe and America. That's fundamentally changed now. And this is the part of the world that is growing, that is developing, and that is creating wealth. That doesn't mean European and American companies won't participate, they will. But these economies and the people living in these economies are the ones who are going to get wealthier, and of course that provides opportunities for a whole range of industries, not just banking. So we're doing very well.
Thank you very much for that update.
On the other side of the break, Business PNG talks to Richard Prebble, former New Zealand minister, on his ideas about SOE reforms. Welcome back. You're watching Business PNG. The Asian Development Bank has been in constant dialogue with the government with regards to ways of improving state-owned entities. Richard Prebble, a former New Zealand minister, was brought in by ADB to advise the government on ways to reform Papua New Guinea's state-owned enterprises. Prebble, who is renowned for his successful SOE reforms in New Zealand, turned the country's SOEs to profit-making institutions. As a result, much of his methods of reforms are now being imitated throughout the world. His advice now highly sought after. Let's hear what the former minister has to say.
Welcome back to Business PNG. With me in the studio, the country director for the Asian Development Bank, Marcello Mink, and a special guest speaking at the Port Moresby Chamber Breakfast this morning, Richard Prebble, who's being here to speak on SOE reform. Marcello, you've brought Richard. Why have you brought Richard to us?
Well, as part of our dialogue with the government in trying to improve the state of state-owned enterprises, we thought that was a good idea to bring a well-renowned person dealing with these issues. And Richard has an excellent track record in New Zealand that has been replicated in other countries also successfully.
Just over a year you've been here. I mean, initially there was not much appetite for this discussion. Has that changed?
Well, yes. I think we have now a good reception from the different sectors of the economy, starting with the government, some of the ministers, some of the government officials, and even from the state-owned enterprises themselves.
So, who's Richard been speaking to?
Well, he had meetings with the Minister of Public Enterprises, with the Managing Director of IPBC, also some meetings, some talks at the university.
Richard, you were the first minister for state-owned enterprises in New Zealand. It's not unreasonable to say for many countries, what you put in place with 21 businesses, I think you had in charge of. Many people consider you the architect of SOE reform, and it's been copied around the world. Are there lessons that PNG can learn from what you went through?
Oh, absolutely, but we can learn as well. That's what I've about this report. I'm waving it around for people, but this is the one that
this is finding balance, yes.
Yeah. But it's a benchmark report, so we're comparing one state business with another, and when you look around the world, governments tend to be in the same businesses. They tend to be in ports, they tend to be in airports.
Fairly critical areas as well.
Oh, absolutely critical. No one can run a business without having to deal with them. And the idea of comparing them, that's a very logical thought, but I must admit, I wish I'd had one of these reports, and so you can compare. And I say, and I've said here today, that the Papua New Guinea government is to be commended for doing this, because that shows that they are serious.
Yes.
And it brings out good things and bad. And the good ones are, actually Papua New Guinea's state-owned enterprises compare quite well to a lot of other countries. The challenging thing for them is when you compare the state-owned enterprises with Papua New Guinea-owned companies, so your own people, actually their performance is not as good as the average private sector company.
And that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, but it shows that it can be done.
Okay. Coming back to New Zealand, I mean, when did this policy come into place, and how bad was it? If bad's the right term, I mean.
Bad is the right term.
Bad is the right term, I think. Yeah.
Unbelievably bad.
Okay.
I say when I became minister, we had a railway there. We were losing 2 million kina a day,
Yes.
every single day. And we were giving examples, we were losing freight as well. The service was appalling. The telephone service didn't work. We had power cuts. Does this all sound familiar? Our ports,
Well, it does sound
our
familiar,
ports
yes,
were bad. We tended to have militant unions, so that the airline was always on strike. The effect on the country was bad. Why did we make the change? Well, the whole country was in such a bad state that we had to. And what we did was a very simple idea, and I
What was that simple idea? Tell us.
Well, the simple idea was that why don't we take the government trading activities and treat them like a company? Set it up as a company. Why don't we get some private sector directors who know about running a company, put them in charge? Why don't we give them a simple task and just say we want to run it like a company, make a profit, give us a dividend, and then say, what about the social services? We said, okay, you tell us what the social services are that the port's running, and we'll put it up as parliamentarians against all the other things, because that's what we have to, your MPs, that's what they have to do every year when they do the budget. Can't spend the money twice. Are we going to spend the money on a hospital, or are we going to spend it on a subsidy to the post office?
Is it as stark as that?
It's absolutely as stark as that. You've got to say to yourself, every dollar I'm giving to the post office, I'm not picking on them, but every dollar I'm giving to the post office is a dollar that I can't give to a child to go to school.
Okay.
It's a dollar I can't give for an operation. And when the members of parliament actually do that, they tend to say, well, actually, I'm in favour of schools and hospitals, and really I don't know if I need this business service that much.
Our talks with Richard Prebble continues when we come back. Allowing other flowers to bloom. This was a statement by Mr. Prebble on breaking the monopoly and how it improves certain public services in New Zealand. But will breaking the monopoly and privatisation work for PNG?
Globally, you've won great credibility for what you did in New Zealand. I have to assume you didn't make a lot of friends. There were some really tough decisions to make. You talked about the post office. You talked about the airline today. I mean, what were some of the impacts? Of this
one of the tougher decisions that we had was that politicians had used state-owned enterprises to create a whole lot of non-jobs.
Yeah.
So that we had thousands of people who were actually working for the government, but they were only being paid, but they had absolutely nothing to do. And I had to say to those people who'd done nothing wrong, look, we can't afford to keep doing that. And we had a voluntary redundancy package, and the number of people working for the railways, for example, went from 22,000 to 5,000.
Is that one of the keys, the redundancies done properly? You mentioned, I think, redundancy parties where they toast you. Is that a key to doing this?
Well, I think so, because you've got to treat people properly. And being mean about paying out people, it's just another capital expenditure.
You might as well make the expenditure as a recurrent expenditure through the many years. Yeah.
Well, take the ports as an example. In New Zealand, our wharfies literally were earning as much money as brain surgeons. Wow. I mean, they got they were getting a lot of money. And I said to the guys, and they said, but the redundancy package is going to be heavy. But I then said, well, look, the return from reducing the number, you'll get your money back in 1 year. Can you show me any capital expenditure you're doing? You get the money back in 1 year, and in fact the average rate of return for putting in a new crane was 10%, and so you get 10 times more from the redundancy. What on earth are you talking about? Yeah. And we did the package, and we did all that without strikes, but that was only part of the message. The real message that I'm giving up here is to say, look, what you need to do is open up the competition. So your state-owned enterprises are competing, and that's actually good for the state-owned enterprise. When you've got a monopoly, how can you say to the people who demand more money, we can't afford it? Because you just put it on extra airfares, put it on extra power charges. But when there's a competition, you say, hey, if we put our prices up, people are going to buy from the competitor.
You used the term allow other flowers to bloom.
Other
I
flowers
like
to bloom.
that. I mean, and when you put it in context of the airline, I mean, what does reform of your airline industry do to the rest of the economy? What did it do to New Zealand, for example?
Oh, absolutely massive. We opened up the airline to competition, and Ansett was allowed to fly. Immediately, Air New Zealand services improved. They put on more services. They stopped having strikes, and then they lowered the airfares. What did that do? That enabled tourism. And tourism, before we started that, was a small industry in New Zealand. It's now the biggest. It employs more people than any other industry. And that shows how important the state-owned enterprises are. The state-owned enterprise, when they reform, they allow, as I say, 1,000 flowers to bloom. When your port's more efficient, people can import and export at a profit, whereas previously they may not have because the costs too high.
So you're removing a monopoly. Marcello, what's the sense you have now? Is it optimistic that the government really wants to move into SOE reform? What's the sense you have?
Well, I think the sense we have is that government is serious about it. You remember in September last year when we had the launching of the Finding Balance report.
Yes.
Of course, some people did not like it in the beginning, but I think we had, at least it started a good debate, which, as far as I remember, did not exist, for a number of years.
Yeah.
So, we are pleased with the reaction, and we keep working on it. And the presence of Richard Prebble here, I think, is a good step.
Yes. Yeah. And you get the sense that they're listening. They're going to take this advice.
Oh, look, I was actually very impressed. I thought the minister asked me very
right
good
questions.
Oh, yeah, the right questions. In fact, I thought the officials asked the right questions.
Excellent,
Actually, when I came, I thought I've been favourably impressed by the quality of the questions, the thought that's going on, and these are interesting questions that the government's facing. And the other thing that I was impressed by is that they are still seeking more information and discussion.
We don't really have a lot of the issues. I mean, you talked about strident unionism in New Zealand. I don't get the sense that we have that here.
Well,
is that a bonus?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think unions can do a great job, but one of the problems that you have, and this is human nature, if it's a monopoly and you are asked for a pay rise by your staff, it's easier to give the pay rise when it's a monopoly and you know you can increase the prices. And I've had a look, and I hope they don't mind, but I've looked at the electricity prices here and I realised problems of generators. But wow, these are very expensive prices. And I just say this, that if you have competition, people will think of innovative answers that one company will never think of. I mean, I've left politics. I'm on the board of one of our most successful companies. Gee whiz, we're in a highly competitive business.
This is
a company called Mainfreight, and here's a New Zealand transport company, and we operate right around the world, which you wouldn't think New Zealanders would have an advantage of that. And the point I make is, firstly, we're only able to start because you're allowed to have competition in New Zealand, but then we've taken those techniques and taken them around the world. But when we're going around the world, we don't try to be everything to everybody. So what we haul are larger parcels. We don't take small stuff. When you've got a monopoly,
you're not shipping tractors anymore.
Well, actually, we will ship a tractor for you, but what we won't do is we don't try to move letters.
I see.
We don't try to do courier parcels. That's a different game. But when you have a monopoly, you are forced to provide a whole range of services, some of which probably would have been better done by the private sector.
Finally, Richard, the PNG has a reputation of being an expensive place to do business. Is this type of reform really one of the major ways of cutting into those costs?
Absolutely. And the other thing is that when you're looking at things you can do, the best long-term investment's education. But that's a long-term investment.
Yes,
Your payback's going to be in 20, 30 years. If you're looking at something that gives you a very quick return, it's SOE Reform. And here's the example. I was put in charge of 21 businesses in New Zealand, all of them losing money, all of them running bad services, and only 3 years later, they were all profitable and all the services had improved. The speed in which state-owned enterprises can be turned round is mind-boggling. I mean, I was not expecting the businessmen to be able to make those sorts of returns, and I am sure that even though your SOEs are better than many other countries, if they just lifted themselves to the average of Papua New Guinea companies, and I think they could do better than that, the effect on every citizen would be enormous. Power prices, the ports, the airports, the airline, the water, all those services you have to use.
Yeah, excellent. Richard, thank you very much. Marcello, thank you for your input today to this discussion on SOE reform. And with me in the studio, Marcello Mink, who is the country director for the Asian Development Bank here in Papua New Guinea. And our special guest was Richard Prebble, former New Zealand longest serving Member of Parliament.
And that's all we have lined up for this edition. To access our programs online, log on to www.mtv.com.pg and go to our Business PNG page. Comments and suggestions, send them through to the email address shown on your screen. Also, a reminder that we do have a Facebook page. Drop us a line or two. Until next Tuesday, I'm Antonia Singut. Enjoy the rest of your viewing.